Welcome to this particular GrantStation webinar. Is your organization grant ready? My name is Jeremy Smith. I am GrantStation's Communications and Technology Director. Your presenter today is Alice Ruhnke. She's the president here of GrantStation. Before we begin, though, I'll tell you a little bit about Alice. She has raised over $45 million from federal, state, and private grant makers before she joined us here at GrantStation, and she knows what it takes to get funded. She was the former nonprofit program coordinator and director and the founder of the Grant Advantage, and she has a deep understanding of the challenges that nonprofits face. Now, over the last 20 to 25 years, she's worked in the trenches with hundreds of nonprofit organizations to improve their capacity to raise funds. And today, she's going to improve your capacity to see if you are grant ready. So, Alice, are we grant ready?
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm really glad that we kind of brought up that capacity building issue because I really feel like this is kind of a capacity building webinar to help you learn about the things that grant makers are looking for you to have, and either explicitly by asking you for things, or sometimes there's things that they kind of expect that you've done in the background, maybe you haven't done those things. So we're going to go through the webinar kind of like starting from the beginning, but just building and growing on the different components. And so we'll have a really busy 90 minutes, and we'll have that time for questions at the end. So we're just going to kind of, again, start with that initial eligibility requirements, and then build on that to the different best practices that are out there, the different components that you need. And in the description, I promised a checklist of things that you could be looking at. I'm not presenting it as a checklist. I'm kind of presenting it more as some of the really common things that, rather universally grant makers are looking for. And then especially those areas of weakness that I've seen over the years when working with new clients or new organizations, or organizations that are just kind of leveling up their game, and how they grow into bigger and bigger grants. So as we go through each thing, I have different kind of tips and workarounds, if you will, or different areas that you can try to develop if you find that you don't have these things in place, as opposed to just saying, here's a list of things you need to have. So that's kind of how we're going to go through this. And then, like I said, questions at the end. Go ahead and dump them in the chat, in the Q&A, and we'll get to them all at the end. But before we get started, I have just a couple of poll questions for you, just so I can kind of understand who's in the room here. So there's two questions. Jeremy's gonna pop the polls up, and that'll just kind of help me understand where you guys are at. So the first question is just, have you ever applied for a grant? So we're getting a lot of answers in here. That's great. And we're getting, yeah, and you guys are all paying attention. So that's great. I can see you guys all answering. So we've got a lot of people. We give it 3 more seconds. Okay, and then end the poll. We got almost 100% participation here. So Jeremy, do I hit stop sharing, or do you do that?
That's all me. So I'll go ahead and take care of that.
So go ahead and hit stop, and let's see what we got. We got an 80-20 split of 80% of you have applied for a grant and 20% of you have not. So that's really nice, even numbers there. So very good. That's very good to know. It's kind of see where you're at in the grant world. And then we have a second question, just to kind of understand what you're anticipating your grant income, not all your development income, but just kind of what are you kind of seeking in 2023 for grants. And again, that just kind of helps me kind of understand, are we looking at smaller grants, bigger grants, mid-sized grants, and those terms all mean different things to different people, but this is kind of how I broke them down. So again, we're getting really close. I like how you're all participating here. So good. So we got the same amount of answers. So Jeremy, if you want to hit the share. So we got a few people that don't know. All of you are at least trying to raise something. So there's nobody in here that's not interested in grants. About 8% of you are in the $1 to $5,000 range, which, you know, for new organizations, a lot of times it's that low-hanging fruit to start to build from. And then kind of what I expected, there's a lot of you, there's 23% of you in the 5,000 to 25,000 range, which also makes a lot of sense. And then 11% in the 25 to 70. And then also a good amount of you in the over 70,000. So I can see a lot of you guys are kind of leveling up. You know that you can get grants, right? But what are some of those things that you can do to make your applications even stronger and kind of increase the amount of grants coming to your organization? So I think this will be helpful kind of for everybody from the beginning of the process all the way to the end. So just wanted to share with you that GrantStation is having we are on sale right now with GrantStation memberships for $179 or $219 for 2 years, and just our website in case you want to look at other webinar options. So we're starting really right at the basics here, right, with what's a grant. But I really like this kind of definition, if you will, because I think that it's really important that at how we're perceiving grants. So for a funder, you know, they have the dollars, obviously, and they have a mission, and they are giving their dollars to you as an investment to make some sort of positive change in the community. That's what their dollars are geared for. And for you, you know, you really want to think of grants as a tool in your toolbox, not the only thing you have, right? You want to be very diverse in your funding, but grants are a tool to use to affect the change that you're seeking in the community. And as you're kind of developing your grant strategy, developing your individual applications, always realize that grants are about their impact and not about the money. So you would never go to a funder or a donor, for that matter, and talk about the money that you need and what your organization needs, and talk about those needs all internal to your organization. That you want to present yourself as using those dollars to provide a solution in the community. And it's not compelling to a funder or a donor for you to come up to them and say, I need money. Well, of course you need money. Everybody needs money, right? That's not compelling. The compelling part is the solutions that you provide. So always kind of orienting yourself around that being the predominant discussion point about the difference that you make or anticipate making with the money, with your programs, with your organization. For those of you kind of at the very beginning, you might be sitting in a place where you haven't even started your nonprofit. So I'm just going to briefly go through, you know, kind of how do you become a nonprofit? Because this is a requirement to get grants, that you have all of this stuff all lined up. So you will want to check, each state has a different state specific requirement. So you check with your state's, usually like a Secretary of State's office or what your state equivalent is, to file with your state for becoming a nonprofit organization. And then you kind of work your way up to the federal part about filling out the federal tax form or the federal form, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But one of the places that I really encourage you to check with, and this is if you're just getting started or even if you've already, you know, started and you exist, is work with your state. Most states have a nonprofit association or other like organization that kind of builds the capacity of the nonprofit sector. So check them, because each state has different rules about setting up. And then about how your organization has to operate, what some of those principles and requirements are, like how many board members you have to have and how often you have to meet and how often you have to file certain reports. So your state's nonprofit association, the nice thing about that is they're going to know exactly what your own state's requirements are, so that as you're developing those, you're getting them in line with your state right away. Then as I kind of go through this webinar, I'm going to be talking about like things that most funders ask for or kind of what the trends are, but there's always outliers, and so always, use what the funder that you're applying to, always make sure that you use their directions and their instructions and their guidance. And if you're in the process of looking for funds and you don't know like if I'm eligible or different kinds of things, especially as we go through some of these first ones about financials, just contact the funder. Don't fear that. Have your good set of questions that you'd like to talk with them about any confusions about your eligibility or different things like that, and talk with them before you develop your application to make sure that you are indeed eligible to apply. So after you get your state nonprofit incorporation status, then you fill out the tax form, or not tax form, I keep saying tax form, but it's the form, the IRS form 1023. And that takes a little bit of time to do, but that's how you get your federal nonprofit exemption. And there is also an EZ form out there if you haven't done this yet, and you will have, you don't anticipate having income of more than $50,000, you can fill out the EZ form to get your tax exempt status, which can be a big time saver for you. And then the IRS does the work that they do, and then you will get your identification number and your nonprofit incorporation number. So always kind of make sure that you realize that the state status and the IRS status are two different things. Because one time it was a heartbreaking thing, but I was doing some grant review and some people had submitted their state nonprofit incorporation status document instead of their federal IRS tax exempt letter, and because they submitted the wrong form, they weren't even read because they didn't submit the right form, which was heartbreaking. But that's what happened, and that can happen. So just kind of make sure you understand there's a difference between those two. So here's something that that most grantors are going to ask you for. So, and these are called kind of common attachments. And again, that just kind of makes sense. These are things that grantors ask you to attach to the narrative of your application. So we've already talked about the IRS nonprofit determination letter. A lot of times they're going to ask for your tax forms. And if you don't file a tax form and you do the 10 or the 990N, a lot of times that will suffice for the 990. And then they might ask for audits. Now, you may be too small for an audit, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And we'll talk about kind of some workarounds in that, because some are very set that you have to have the audit and others will make workarounds for you. So we'll talk about more on that on the next slide. Then the next four on the list are things that you will kind of want to update every year: your list of board members and their contact information, your annual organization budget, and we'll talk more about budgets later. And then resumes or job descriptions of your key staff, or if your organization has key volunteers, you can include that as well. But these are things that you want to keep on a shared drive for everybody in your organization to access, or have on multiple computers and that sort of thing, so that everybody in your organization that's working to apply for grants has easy access to, because these are just common documents that will need to be turned around each year, within your own system and then submitted to the funders. So Most of these are, like I said, kind of self-explanatory, but let's talk just briefly about audits because they can be a real sticking point, especially, with the number on here that we have that are very new. So this is I live in West Virginia, so most of my examples are West Virginia, but you can find this from your nonprofit association, what the requirements are for an independent, to have an audit. So you can see here I'm not going to read it all, but you can see here in these two categories, if you have this much money, you get this much money in West Virginia, you need to have a single audit by an independent CPA. And then if you are in the $2,000 or $200,000 to $500,000 range, you can just have what's called a financial review, where they look at your documents and identify that you're following, generally accepted accounting principles and things like that, and put things in a way that makes you kind of all legit by a CPA and by the government. And then a financial compilation is really the lowest level of, they cost the least and it's the least amount of scrutiny, but they at least put all of your financial statements in the format that they ensure that you're in the correct format for those generally accepted accounting principles. But they don't ensure that, none of the back end stuff of looking through your records and stuff like that. So you'll want to find your particular, where you fall in this, and then have those, compilations done or financial review or audit as appropriate. Now, the one thing that I find as the biggest sticking point is there are some funders who require an audit, and yet the organization, maybe only has a $50,000 budget, and it's like, well, of course you're not going to pay, the amount of money for a full-blown audit when you only have an income of $50,000. So a couple of workarounds as we kind of talk about your financial records. I'll talk a little bit about some options that you have there, because that's a big sticking point. And if you find that, one of the requirements is the audit, and you don't have the audit, then I would call them, because again, sometimes they'll say, okay, well, instead submit this or that, or submit me, all of your balance sheet, your profit and loss statements or whatever, and we'll look at that. And then others will just say, no, I need the audit. So we'll kind of talk about what the workaround is there. So when you're looking at your financial systems and getting those set up, you're going to want to put together internal processes that ensure that you have those controls over your finances. So, the systems that kind of protect any sort of fraud or misuse. So part of those financial systems are about developing the policies and procedures that help you avoid conflicts of interest, help you avoid theft or embezzlement and things like that. So there's the part about the policies. And then there's just the part about having, the structure to pull out the reports you need and things like that. So if you're kind of, still in like a checkbook accounting method, you probably want to level up to, some sort of software accounting system like QuickBooks or some other system that really allows you to track your finances and create the financial reports that your board needs and that funders would see and want. And if you don't know about TechSoup, they're a great organization that provides the technology and software and hardware that nonprofits need at a really reduced cost. So I encourage you to check out TechSoup if you need to purchase one of those systems to get that at a cheaper rate. And then another thing that we did as in the last nonprofit that I worked for was that we were leveling up. So we had the software system, we had, monies flowing in and out, we had all that sort of thing. But then we started to kind of grow to federal and state grants. And with that, there's a kind of a whole nother layer of scrutiny and rules that you need to follow. So what we did there was we had just, our standard bookkeeper who had an accounting degree and stuff that did the daily books. But then we hired a CPA to come in and kind of coach or mentor that bookkeeper and kind of look over his shoulder a bit to make sure that we were, meeting all of the federal and state regulations, but we couldn't afford a full-blown, CPA on staff. So that can also be kind of a workaround to have somebody who kind of helps guide your staff if they don't have, the higher level credentials that you might need to level up to those bigger grants. That's just a really nice, again, a workaround to make it, manageable and affordable to your organization. So another kind of workaround with that is if a funder says you have to have an audit and you don't have an audit, and they say that that's just, a deal breaker, then you could look out to find someone to be your fiscal sponsor, another organization that actually gets the grant funds, but and then administers those funds, and they actually get the audit and that sort of thing. But you work with them and your project becomes kind of a project of theirs that they support. And so you can, work with a fiscal sponsor. You don't want to just jump in and do it. Like, you want to really build that relationship to make sure that, everything's legit. You know what they're going to provide to you. They know what you're going to provide to them in the reporting and different things like that. So don't jump into it without, some due diligence. But I've had, it was just a different organization that I worked with, and they wanted to get the, in Michigan, like the community development block grant dollars, and they had to have an audit and they didn't have one. So they got the fiscal sponsor, and that helped them, get those dollars, implement those projects, build those relationships with those funders, and then, build up enough of their own internal capacity to then, get the audit down the road. But it's a nice kind of, if you're in this middle space of not, not being big enough, not being small enough, that it can help you grow by fiscal sponsorship. So that's just, again, a really economical workaround to make sure that you're meeting the financial requirements. So that's kind of about, setting up with your appropriate ID, not ID, nonprofit incorporation status, and then kind of those tricky finances that you have to kind of be prepared for. The next part I'm going to talk about is a little bit more about kind of knowing your own organization and being able to kind of communicate that out to the public, and finding those funders that really match who you are in your mission and visions and values. So this really helps you really understanding knowing who you are. And then as you're going out looking for funds, to staying true to that mission and not chasing the money. Because sometimes you might find a funding opportunity out there and you're like, oh, wow, I would have to change X, Y, and Z, but then we'd be eligible. And not that that's a terrible thing to do, but you want to make sure that you don't, creep too far away from your mission when looking for those dollars. You want to find those matches that match who you are and what you value as an organization. Because sometimes you can look at yourself 5 years down the road and go, this isn't even what we started doing. Why are we even doing this? If you're not, really clear in who you are and what you're trying to do. So another place that comes into play a lot is like when you're looking for those matches with those funders. So here is just an example from GrantStation's database of two funders, the Jacobson Foundation and their areas of interest, and then the things that they support. So the different kinds of things that they will provide. And then here's just another example from the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, really showing what they support, right? So this is just a little bit of a snapshot of our full profiles. But again, it's really important to find that match. And I have a kind of a funny story of this local foundation. I'm sure it wasn't funny to the people involved, but they were at one point, they were giving away a little like incentive for their grantees to write really good grant applications. And so they were giving away a $500 gift card for the best written grant of each cycle. And so I was talking with them and I was like, oh, well, that's really nice, so they could give it to themselves as an organization or another nonprofit they could give it to. And I said, well, so that's kind of nice. So they would get, the $20,000 grant or whatever they asked for, plus the extra 500 to give to their organization for writing the best written grant. And then the lady said to me, she goes, well, interesting, Alice, in this last round, the best written grant wasn't funded. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, it was a very well-written proposal. It was the best grant, but they did not support the same things that we support, right? And so let's just say in this example, they were providing environmental work. And the Jacobson Foundation would be like, hey, it's a great grant. It just doesn't support, what we do. So you always want to make sure that you find those matches and find the ways that you and the foundation are, reaching out there to make that change in the community. And you always want to make it aligned, because even if, like I said, you write the best grant, if you don't match them, you're not going to get funded anyway. When looking with the funders, it's always really important as well to understand their award requirements. So, again, it can be easy to go out there and see the dollar signs, of what this funder, they're providing $70,000 of grant funding per organization. And that's, a lot of money to us or whatever. But always realize what their financial and programmatic reporting requirements are. And if you have to, for example, write in staff time to do those reports and that sort of thing, because sometimes the reporting can be take a lot of time and be very extensive. So always make sure that you understand what they're requiring on the back end to support you in, putting your own budgets together and making sure that you have enough staff and time that it's going to make financial sense for you to get the grant. And again, I had one client one time that we actually got the grant and they hadn't set up the programmatic requirements until after the grants were awarded. And when that nonprofit saw all that they were going to have to do, they actually turned the money down, which was pretty, pretty surprising. But they were like, this is not enough money based on what I know that you guys are going to require us to do. So always understanding that. And then if the funder has, requirements that you go to meetings or requirements that you go to trainings or just offer trainings, again, working that into your kind of consideration so that what you have to meet if you get the grant. So those should be things that you're also kind of deciding if this is a good fit for me. This part really comes down to that kind of understanding yourself again and having these different components of an application kind of pre-thought through so that you can, again, it's going to help you in finding those funders and donors that will support you by really understanding the full scope of your projects. So when looking at the organizational and kind of program background, kind of being able to talk about how many people you've served in the past and kind of understanding the relevant demographic data that might go with that, age, race, gender, socioeconomic status might not mean anything to you, but it might, sort of thing. So kind of being able to communicate that and have that information kind of collected is really important before you even start the process of preparing an application. and really looking at how, in the past, people have improved, how people have changed, or how that you've helped the community, those sorts of things. So kind of getting that organizational background of what you've done in the past kind of developed and fleshed out is really important to help you search for the best funders to help you advance your programs and things like that. If you're like really new and you're just kind of starting, which I know some of you are, what's the projection of those, that we anticipate serving this many people and, between these ages in households with low incomes or whatever, kind of understanding what your projections are and how you see, things changing because of your services. So the rest of these are kind of part of a checklist. Again, that will be part of your overall checklist of really having those things kind of set up, or things that you can at least, if you're doing it on your own, that you can develop on your own, or if you're working with an external consultant to help you write grants, that you can start to feed them this information. You've thought through it. You've kind of developed these different components. Again, talked about the background. Then we want to talk about what that need is in the community. So any data that supports what you're doing, from describing your community and describing what your target population is kind of challenged with. And then again, kind of similar to over here, looking at what you're trying to see changed. What's that vision that you have? How do you see people changing in their skills and abilities, or their behavior changes, or those ultimate changes, that you're looking for? So how many people do you want to see move from homelessness to having a home, or from being, in active addiction to recovery, that kind of thing? So like, how do you see people changing because of your work? And that's, part of that solutions-based component that we were talking about at the very beginning, of being able to tell that to the funder, how you have these solutions. Your approach is probably the easiest of all in kind of just understanding the steps of what you do and how you do it. And that, kind of section will have to be well laid out in an application, so the funder understands what you're trying to do, just with your staff members and with the money that they're giving you, right? So how are you going to take those resources in that project budget and provide those resources, use those resources in what you do? And then part of these outcomes and part of kind of collecting these demographics over here is part of your evaluation process. So really lining up that I've worked with a lot of organizations that kind of started doing the work. They know the need of, let's say, how many youth are not in school and not employed. So they develop a program to get these youth trained. So they know the need, they have that data, they know what they're going to do through this, trades program. They know that ultimately they're going to get people jobs, but they've not sat down and formally collected data in the past. That's a really common thing that I see, right? They've done it with volunteers and with, other, smaller donations, but they're trying to jump up into the grant world. So they have to then develop those official evaluation processes that collects this data and that sort of thing. So that's a really common one that I see, that people maybe have done it, but they just don't have the formal process yet. So it's kind of again, a capacity issue of just building that process and then being able to incorporate it into your proposals. And then obviously your project budget, which we'll talk about even more on the next slide. So with budgets, it's really quite common for funders to ask for two budgets: an organizational budget, which is your entire organization, and then the project budget being just what you're asking for funds for from this particular initiative. Now, again, if you're really small, those could be the same thing. Like if your organization only does one thing, your organizational budget and your project budget could very well be the same thing. But for those of you that have, several different initiatives out there, you would have two different budgets. And what they're generally asking you for are, what are all your revenues? So where's your money coming from? From grants, from donations, from any earned income, revenues that you have, fundraisers, all those sorts of things. Where's your money coming in from? And then what are you spending your money on in your expenses? And again, with the project budget, it would be the same thing of kind of where's the money coming from, and what are you needing from the funder. So a real important tip here that is really important is matching funds. And so, do you have other funds that support your grant request? So most of the time, funders do not want you to say, I have a $50,000 project. Will you give me $50,000? Like, they want to see that there's other support coming in from other places. And that support, they'll tell, sometimes they require it, right? So they would say, we need support, to match, and we need you to match 30% of the program, costs or something like that. So sometimes they tell you what the match is. Other times, even if they don't require it from a regular, community-based funder, I'm very rarely asking for 100% of the project costs, because they want, like I said, to see that you have support coming from other places, even if they're not requiring it. So how do we find, again, this is a great thing to be building your own capacity on, is how do you find those matching funds, say, even before you have a grant request out there? And the ways to do that are through kind of two areas: the real money that you have, and then in-kind money. So real money would be, organizational funds that you have through, again, earned income streams. Or if you have, you're lucky enough to have assets and you get interest, or just anything that your organization generates. It might be other real money that you get from donations, from your, donors that give you $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever they give you. Usually those donations can be used to match other things. Usually they're given in an unrestricted way that kind of says you can spend it however you feel is the best way to spend it. It might be through fundraising, that you get those dollars as well, where you can, usually take those dollars that are fundraise and match a grant with some of those dollars. Or usually, with the exception of federal grants, you can match grants with grants. So you go to one funder to ask, let's say you need two things for your project. Let's say it's a coding club that you're doing for kids. You need money for computers and technology, and you need money for stipends for the instructors. So you could go to one funder asking for the donation for the technology, the other funder for the instructor, and match those grants together. So they see that I needed 10,000 from here, I need 20,000 for the instructor. So the total cost is 30,000, and you're not asking either funder for all the project costs. So you can, match them up together. Now, all that being said, and I'm running out of breath, a lot of times we don't have a lot of that real money, do we? That's why we're on a webinar today. And so another place to find that match is by using in-kind support. So each year, this group called the Independent Sector, right here, and you can just Google Independent Sector, I think it's .org. Each year, they calculate the value of a volunteer hour and provide that in two ways. They do it for like the entire United States, and then they do it state by state for every state. Now, the value of a volunteer hour in West Virginia in 2021, for example, is $25.07. And if you keep track of this as if it's like a timesheet for an employee, you keep this as a trackable thing, you can add in the value of the volunteer activities into in-kind support for your programs. So it can be a great idea to start right now with, tracking how much volunteer support you get. Just have people do simple timesheets just to track how many, volunteers are supporting your project. And I'll bet that a lot of you will find that that number of whatever your state is will really add up to a lot of additional support that you can demonstrate as in kind. I'll give you another example of that. I was working with a group that was developing on in a rural area. It's just like a little lake, I think it was a little lake, and it was a community lake, and they were creating a bathhouse so people could come off the lake and shower off and then do whatever else at the facility. And we were going to Lowe's to ask for all the money all the materials that it took to build that bathhouse. So I don't remember the exact amounts, but let's just say it was $25,000 of, what we needed, all the stuff to build it. But volunteers were building that bathhouse, so we then calculated what all the volunteer activity would be, how many hours that would take, how many person hours it would take to do all that work. And all of a sudden that's, I'm just making up numbers here, but that's $40,000, right? So $40,000 for the volunteers. And then we needed $25,000 from Lowe's. So when we went to Lowe's, we said, we're asking for $25,000 off of a $65,000 project, because that's what it really cost. There wasn't money exchanged with the volunteers, but that bathhouse was not going to be built without both things, right? So like, if you start now with tracking these hours, you're going to find that you're going to have a lot of, additional in-kind support, very likely to show the funder that you have other support for your projects. If you use like the professional skills, so let's say in that bathhouse thing, we had a real contractor that came out and moved the earth with their big machines and, flattened the land and did this and that. We could use not the 2507 number, but we could use what that person did in their professional job as, as an in-kind support. So let's say that was $5,000 that person as a professional gave in volunteer. So in those kind of cases, you just get what that professional, what their rate is, get it on their letterhead, what they're providing to you. And then that professional activity would even have a higher rate usually than the volunteer activity rate. So those, and then if you get any discounts, so let's say you needed the computers for that coding class, and Best Buy was going to give them to you at $100 off and you needed 10, well, then $1,000 is part of a match, right? Because it was discounted to you. It was provided at a lower rate. So that's, again, these are things that you can be doing now to make sure your capacity when you're out there to write grants is, you've got these things kind of in place, or at least started and established. Another really interesting thing with kind of match and kind of looking at giving trends over, say, the last decade, that corporate giving, with the exception of during the pandemic, corporate giving had consistently been going up. Then during the pandemic, obviously it went down because they were paying staff, but not getting goods and services purchased. So then their giving went down, but it's come back up now. But one of the ways that corporations have been giving more is in giving these kinds of in-kind donations, of giving you, computers and office equipment and your printers and your copiers and things that they are no longer using, or providing spaces for you to meet. There's a lot of places around us that nonprofits can come in and use their facilities for free, because that's like one of their in-kind donations. So, get it written up of what the value of that space is, and that's an in-kind donation. And then the really big one is giving the expertise of their staff to volunteer for nonprofit organizations to do things like marketing, or providing, doing their taxes, or providing legal advice. So anytime you can get that kind of expertise from from a business or a corporation, that's just, again, a great in-kind donation to your organization. I had another client who, through this marketing, for-profit marketing company, they redid all their logos, their design, wrapped their trucks, and did that whole process for them, and did it all for free. And so that's just like a piece of an in-kind donation that's just so valuable to your work. So again, you would just get it written down as to what the value are of these things by working with the business or corporation, and then that can provide that additional in-kind support. So again, so the funders are seeing that you're not, it's just a way to show that you've got more support coming in, even if it's not real money changing hands. But these are very important parts of your overall strategy. Then the sustainability question. And this is a question that, gets asked in most grant applications of, how will you sustain this program? Or, what is your sustainability plan? Those kinds of things. And what I always found was a lot of my clients didn't really have a sustainability plan, right? It was like, well, we're just going to continue to get more grants. And, if that was the case, if that was the plan, then, that's what I would write about, how, they were trying to, the steps that they were taking to do like this webinar and grow their capacity to be eligible for more and more funds. But the more you can think about this from the very beginning, the better, because a lot of times you go into this work and you see, that there's grants out there or whatever, and then you just kind of chase your tail from grant to grant to grant. It's like this never ending process. Like there's never like a finish line. It's just like constant, right? So you want to think about how, are there other things that can support the work that you do? Are there other ways that you can generate your own dollars to support the work you do through any sort of social enterprise or anything like that? And if you can build this in from the very beginning, it's just a real strength for you as an organization, because kind of that total, I get the grant, now I've got to do all the work and get the next grant, and it just goes on and on forever. So is there a way to think about other, diversified funding that you could have coming into your organization so that you can answer that sustainability question? Which I don't think in just kind of in general, nonprofits aren't that good at this. I mean, it's not something that we're really strong in. So just something to bolster your own strength as an organization. And then partnerships. And again, this is something that you can be developing now to really help build, when you're ready to write that grant and ready to go after those dollars, having those partnerships already kind of established that you can formalize to apply for a different grant application. So kind of looking at who else is in your community that's kind of doing the same kind of work you're doing. How are you different or unique? How are you the same? How can you share resources, or how can you partner together? How can you help other organizations? How can they help you? And one of the really great ways to kind of identify those partners, if you haven't done this yet, is to kind of look and do a root cause analysis of what is going on with your target population. So, you're going to identify that need. We already talked about that. How many people are homeless? How many people are struggling with addictions? How many kids are dropping out of high school? Whatever it is that you're addressing. So you're going to have the data that shows what's going on. When you do that root cause analysis, what you're saying, or what you're asking yourself, is why does this problem exist? Why are there so many people that are homeless or struggling with addiction or whatever? And by asking yourself that question and working with your target population, you're going to identify things that you're going to address. So, you're going to provide job training for these youth, for example. But the youth are really also struggling with getting rides to their employment. So you're not going to provide that though, because this other organization that's providing this transportation assistance. So you can then bring in the resources of that organization that's providing the transportation, partner with them, and then, more holistically deal with the problem that you're dealing with. So it's using assets in your community. Funders really want you to work collaboratively and share those resources. And so that root cause analysis can help you start to identify who those people are, these organizations are, that you might want to bring in to help support the work that you're doing. And we do have, I'm doing a webinar on the 29th where we talk about this in even more detail if you want more information. So here's just an example of, kind of doing that root cause analysis. We have, 25% of youth in this middle school aren't doing well, and they're not proficient in math and reading scores. You can see the numbers. So we know the numbers of why it exists. But when we do the root cause analysis, we came up with 4 different areas that the kids were struggling with, the reasons why they were so below proficiency. And the first was that the parents don't have the skills to help them. These are not in any particular order. The second was kind of a bit of an attitude issue, if you will, of youth not understanding that what they're doing today matters for tomorrow. So there needed to be some education around that, why this work matters. They didn't have any tutoring programs, and then they didn't have access to technology out of school hours. So in this example, we're going to build an after-school program to fill in this gap and to really provide that kind of mentoring of them seeing success stories of people in the community who went to their same school and then did well afterwards. And, we're going to address these 2 things, but we don't need to, do things for the parents. We can just bring in adult basic education, which already has a program that works, and they can help provide services to any of those parents or guardians that wanted that support. And then we learned that the school board was starting to do this iPad program. So we're not going to go out and buy technology and do all that kind of thing. We're just going to use those iPads, learn how they're using them in the classroom, and then incorporate those iPads, right into our programs. So again, you can kind of see how this really helps you identify partners and go out and develop those win-win situations for adult basic education and the county school board, right? You helping them is a win for them. And then them providing those resources to you is a win for you. So another way to look at partnerships is just a tool that I'll also send out when we send out the recording and such. But it's just a partnership identification tool of looking at, again, trying to look broadly at what might exist in your community and what, why they would want to partner with you, what you could provide to them, and then what you would kind of ask them for. Is it money? Is it volunteers? Is it that in-kind support of, providing a service to you or what have you? So when just looking at businesses and corporations, you can be, again, I live in a rural community, so we don't have a ton of businesses and corporations just local to us. So, it can be a real challenge to find those partners. But if you kind of expand out of looking at where do your board members work, where do your volunteers work, those sorts of things to identify those companies, or identify companies that sell to your, volunteers and your board members or your participants, or people who you buy stuff from, that your vendors, even if they're not in your local community. And then also just thinking of affinity corporations, thinking of corporations who do kind of for-profit equivalent of what your nonprofit is doing. So kind of looking at, we provide, services to individuals with physical disabilities. Maybe an affinity corporation would be people who have sell walkers and wheelchairs and crutches and things like that. So kind of just trying to be as broad as possible. And their motivations just to kind of like keep us there is usually going to be that you advertise for them, in a way. So you say that they sponsored your program, or, you put their information on their website and that kind of thing. So kind of be prepared when you reach out to them that that's what they're going to want to see. So kind of have a little plan for how you will, alert the public that they are great corporate citizens that are giving back to their communities, and how you'll kind of advertise that. And then what your ask is. The rest of the tool, I won't go through this all like line by line, but just different community assets. And just, again, thinking really broadly, are there ways that other, existing groups in your community that you might be able to partner with them to provide, to bring in new components to your projects and programs. So if it's, schools or higher education or high school kids who need volunteer hours, to all your social service agencies and all your communities of faith who give a lot back, your elected officials in government, your civic groups like your Rowatans and things like that. You've got all sorts of healthcare groups out there that are doing work. Public resources I kind of have as a catch-all for like, your streams and waters and, hiking and all that kind of thing. Can any of that be brought in, kind of our natural resources? So just kind of trying to think out of the box a little bit to start to create these partnerships. They take time. They take nurturing. And so it's not just something that all of a sudden I found this grant opportunity and it's all going to work out if I just scribble down, and start to partner with somebody kind of out of the blue. This is something you want to kind of develop over time, and, get your ducks in a row there. So these are all so far areas that I think are the stickiest points for most nonprofits when they're first starting out and trying to get into the grant space, with those workarounds. For those of you that are kind of trying to go from, we've gotten a lot of the local support, we've gotten, the community foundations, the United Ways, some corporate support, and we're kind of going up to federal grants, I really suggest you start this process even before you start looking for those federal grants. Of doing the two things of getting your registrations with what's called grants.gov. And you can follow these links to find the little how to, get your registration going. Not super hard on the grants.gov, but the SAMS, which is the System for Award Management, the SAMS.gov is a harder process and it can take weeks to get done. So if you think that in the next 6 months, you're going to be applying for a federal grant, just do this process now to kind of get it out of the way, so that then when you kind of, start going to the federal grant process, you're just spending your time figuring out how to write that application sort of thing, but get this part out of the way. Because if you don't have this done in time, even if you have the whole thing written, you won't be able to submit it and they won't read it. And then, like I said earlier, as you go up, there's the thing that's called uniform guidance that's given out by the federal government. And it's, also called cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards, those sorts of things. And you can find the whole document down there. But this was where that example that I gave you, where, they have certain requirements that are different and more stringent than that and at a local, foundation would be. So this was where we brought in the CPA to supervise, and, we paid him for what, 1 day a month, I can't remember. Just to come in and make sure we were following all of the uniform guidance, just to do little checks for us, so that when we got to the audit, stage, there wasn't all of a sudden, that's when we found the red flag. And then all of a sudden we were in, heat with the federal government. We certainly didn't want that. So these are things that, you can get training for, through the federal government. I would also think to, like, if you want to apply to Health and Human Resources, for example, find a training opportunity through them. While the uniform guidance isn't going to change, they could have little, differences of how they see you doing it between, say, Health and Human Services and the Department of Justice. So maybe, get a training through them, or have your financial people get a training through them, because this isn't easy. And this isn't even anything I understand. I understood how to manage a grant and do what I was supposed to do, but I didn't really understand all of the uniform guidance because I'm not an accountant. So these are things that you can kind of prepare for, because you don't want to wait until you get the federal grant and then you're audited and then they see, oh, you didn't follow XYZ, and now we want you to pay the money back and we're not going to give you another grant. Certainly that would be a terrible, terrible thing to happen to you. So kind of prepare and get grant ready that way. Just a couple of things, and then a couple of tips, and then I promise I will stop talking and we can get to some of the questions. But as a grant reviewer, these are not things that anybody else, like, these are not universals that everybody's going to say, but these were things that when I was reviewing grants, when I review, like, these are things that I kind of notice, and it gives me pause. So just, what if an organization doesn't have a website, I'm just kind of like, I don't feel like you exist if you don't have a website. Like, why wouldn't you have a website to be communicating out there, or using some sort of social media to be communicating? Like, that always just gave me a bit of concern. Like, why aren't they out there in the community a little bit more? Again, this is just Alice thinking. This is not any sort of universal standards. But it always gave me pause to really want to ask the organization that question, why aren't you having any presence in that area? I would see this a lot, where you'd have an executive director and a board chair who would be the same person. And again, you might start out really small and that sort of thing. But those two roles should be separate. The board chair would be, and the board of directors oversees the executive director, right? I mean, the board is the boss of the executive director. So, like, a lot of times when people were just starting out and they were, I'm the founder of the organization, I'm the board chair, then I'm the executive director. And that's just a red flag, because then you're not really being, the oversight isn't there, because you're both the executive director and you're the chair. And so, there's no oversight. So if you're in that situation, make sure you get those roles distinct as distinct individuals. And then it would always just be a question that I would come back to. It's not like it's not a rule. But if I would see a board of directors list and it was all the same family, again, I would start to see, okay, there's a conflict of interest. There could be a conflict of interest. And so I would always want to ask that organization, more about, how they're doing their work, and making sure that, they're not just on there by name only. And then the person that's the, executive director is doing whatever they want, because their board is just their family members and they're just really running everything. So these are just, take those with a grain of salt. Those are just me in my role as a grant reviewer. Okay, so I just have some tips as we go out there, just for building capacity. And then, like I said, we'll have our questions. But I really find that, kind of finding a friend, with, connecting with another organization that's already receiving grants, and just talk to them about, how did they do it? What would you recommend, organization that just got a grant from ABC Foundation? What should I do? Did you have a meeting with them first? Did you, apply through this channel? How did you do it? And just start to connect in with your own, kind of network that's out there, to start talking to other people about the grants they've received and what kind of guidance they can give you. And then, like, if you want to level up to like federal and state grants, I really recommend that you find it's easier probably at the state level to find the state agency that you're going to apply to, and have a meeting with somebody at that agency and start to get information, so that when so that if a grant opportunity comes up, they might be more apt to say, oh, hey, did you know about that? Make sure you apply. That sort of thing. So kind of working your network, working relationships can really help you understand kind of philanthropy at both the federal and state level and local level. A second tip is just to read successful grants. And that has always helped me to kind of see things that I like, that I want to emulate. Sometimes it's a visual and I see how somebody outlined their program, and then I'm like, oh, that was really good. I want to do something similar. I'm not stealing their work. I'm just saying I want a visual like that, because that really helped me understand their proposal. There might be times when I want to incorporate a visual like that in my awards. So if you have a GrantStation membership, we have an award-winning proposal competition every 2 years. And those are grants that actually won in real life. And then they submitted their proposal to us, and we had another competition. And then those are on our website for you to look at. So those are very, very valuable to find successful grants to read, even if they're not in the area that you're applying. And then if you're looking at the federal level and what you can do, so if for example, okay, next year I want to apply for the Drug-Free Communities grant, you can go to this website, foia.gov, and you kind of just drill through. It's the Department of Health and Human Services, it's Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, it's the Drug-Free Communities grant. Just walk through the tree, and you can request successful copies of those grant applications. So they'll email you, they'll redact things, but they'll send you information so that, again, you can get that just that what does a successful grant look like, sort of thing, at a federal level. And then you can ask for it specifically for that federal grant, which can be so helpful. And I've done it a number of times. Becoming a grant reviewer is a great opportunity to learn the grant process, to understand how things are awarded. Your local community foundations and your local United Ways are almost always looking for volunteer reviewers. You are volunteer. And they give you training, but you're sitting on the other side of the table, which really helps you to understand, how to present things. Again, where those sticky points are that people are having, that sort of thing. You can, depending on your state agency, I know, here, some of our state agencies have volunteer review opportunities. And then I even had a client one time, before I ever started working with her, she was applying for this really, really super competitive, multi-million-dollar grant. And she kept getting rejected. And then one year she decided, okay, I'm not going to apply this year, but I'm going to submit to be a reviewer of that federal grant. And so, she took the whole year off, didn't apply, did the review. And by kind of, again, being in that space and reading successful proposals and hearing what people were saying, then the next year, she came back and was able to write a grant and get it funded. So, that's a long process. I do realize that, but it was a multi-million-dollar grant that makes a huge difference. So, it can take some time, but really valuable. And then I believe this is my last one, I promise, of just developing a grant team. I mean, I think a lot of times when we're in a really small organization, they say, hey, Alice, you're now in charge of saving the organization and doing all the work to get all the grant money that we need. And so, we're going to stick you in a room by yourself and make you write and do some magic and come out and save our organization. And I'm being a little facetious, but sometimes not. But really work to develop that team that you need, of working with, the people who are running the programs and serving in the programs, making sure you're getting their input. A great idea to include those that you serve in the design of your programs, like we were talking about with the root cause analysis. The grant writer is the person that's going to pull it all together and give it one voice. You may need financial people to come in and help you with the budget, but realize that, you don't have to do it alone. And even if you get volunteers who can, maybe some of your board members like to do editing or like to do research or whatever, that can just help you in the process, because you're wearing a lot of hats. I realize that. And so developing a team approach is the way that you're going to make it sustainable when you're just when you're a small organization trying to make it work. And really looking at, I love this slide because I think it's kind of funny. Well, it's not funny, but like, there's people who are just action people, that they just like to do the work. They don't really want to talk about it and spend hours in meetings. They're just kind of the action people. And then you have people who are the people, the people who like to make sure that all the voices around the room are heard, that everybody's had some input, working through any, tough issues or conflicts. They're very important in their role. You have your visionaries, the people who are, provide that meaning and show the big picture, and they can, tell you the vision and bring people on board by really, tugging at their heartstrings and showing them what you value and what your mission is. And then there's people who really like they like check boxes, they have a structure, they want everything done in a certain, kind of order. And really, you need all of these people on your grant writing team, because if you have a group of, the meaning people or the visionaries, they are great people to be around. I love being around visionaries, but they're not going to get a grant written. They're not going to be, because that's not in their style, right? Or if you have all these structure people, it's like you're going to get the work done, but there's not going to be a lot of that meaning to it, because they're, more about just checking the boxes. So you need people who can, a team that can do all of these different things, kind of to help you write your grant, in the most effective ways. So I am worn out, but I am going to get a drink here. Wanted to remind you again, we have other webinars at GrantStation. We'd love to have you join us on other ones. And we're in our sale right now with 1 year for $179 or 2 years for $219. And I encourage you to join us if you don't already have a membership. So it is now Jeremy's favorite time of the webinar, which is the Go Ask Alice part of the webinar.
This is where you can ask any questions you like, and I get to think of the White Rabbit song by Jefferson Airplane. So that being said, now is a great time to go ahead and put any questions you like into the Q&A section. If they go in the chat, I'll probably miss it just because there's a lot of people we have online. Quick reminder, in case this is the question you want to ask, you'll be getting a full recording as well as a copy of all the presentation notes. That'll be arriving on Wednesday of next week. And I'll double check to make sure all those links work correctly. Few people mentioned some of the links weren't working, but I'll just double check to make sure they're all good. So when it all arrives on Wednesday, you will be good to go and have everything you need. So again, GrantStation.com, that's who we are. Good sale right now, roughly 30 cents a day. So just think about that. We have videos you can use to go there and watch everything we've talked about today. Lots of these resources are all available to you as a member of GrantStation. So to sum up some of the questions we got, a lot of them were financial based. And okay, we have to be kind of clear and open. We are definitely not CPAs. We're not accountants. And we do have a lot of webinars we offer from one of our partners, which is QuickBooks Made Easy. They have all this type of knowledge available at their fingertips. And whenever they offer webinars, they offer free ones as well. They go in depth into answering lots of these questions. So some of these I will skip over just because I don't know the answer and we're not experts and we can't look up that specific financial information. So it's not a personal thing, but I will go ahead and make sure that your questions are noted and we'll try to have answers for them next time we do a webinar like this. So question I did have that came up a couple times regarding audits. How
Okay.
often or how recent do they need to be? Do they need to be that year or that month? How
Yeah.
recent does it need to be?
So usually a funder will kind of give that criteria, or they'll say your most recent audit. It will, but it will vary, like your audit times are going to vary, if you're on a calendar year versus if you're on a, what's that other kind of year where you end June 30th. There's different calendar years that a nonprofit would have. So usually they'll kind of say, if they're, especially if it's required, they'll say, if your fiscal year ends June 30th, we want your 2021 audit. If your fiscal year ends December 31st, we want this audit. So usually they'll kind of give you the difference based on when your year end is.
So using an audit from 2016 probably wouldn't work.
Right. And,
Okay.
I would always, use their most recent. I mean, that's always what they want, the most recent. And if, like, for some reason, let's say you did have a 2018 audit and you haven't been audited since, I would reach out to the funder and talk with them, and let them know why and what, and is there a workaround, or is this one sufficient, or what should we do, sort of situation. If it's, not, if it's like way past, but usually it's, last year's audit, right? But whatever a year means, calendar year or fiscal year, that's what it is.
Someone has an interesting question. And I'm not exactly sure of this, but is there a workaround if they require an audit? Maybe you don't have the money for an audit or something like that. Or is it just like you need to find the funding for an audit, maybe find a CPA to donate the time? Or what's your view on that?
Right. So usually, again, it really depends on the funder. So I've had funders who have said, okay, I understand that you don't have an audit, like that doesn't even make financial sense to you. So submit, documents, we'll take your 990 from the last year. Then I want to see, your current profit and loss statement or your current budget sheet. And like, we'll take that as in lieu of. And then others, like, even as like, I want a $2,000 grant and they require an audit, it's like, it doesn't even make financial sense, right? That's when you'd want to get a fiscal sponsor or, have to do something like that. So those are, check with the funder, if there is a workaround. And then if not, then the workaround is working with a fiscal sponsor.
And that is an amazing segue into a bunch of fiscal sponsor questions that we
Oh,
have.
great. Yeah.
So how do you locate them? How do you find a fiscal sponsor?
So I would kind of, again, check with your state nonprofit association. A lot of times they have directories of different services so they might have grant writers or, strategic planners or financial people who would serve in that role. So you can check that out. And then there is also a national organization, and I would have to look it up, but I did a webinar on this not too long ago on fiscal sponsorship. And I'll send that out with the thing, but it's a national organization that works across it has like all the list of all organizations that would serve as a fiscal sponsor across the United States. And then they help you find one. So I'll send that also as part of that link, as part of the notes at the end.
Fantastic. So Connie says that they've been a fiscal sponsor for an LLC. Can they use the grants they received as part of what they received and have been supported with overall? Is that connected or is that a separate thing?
So your organization has been a fiscal sponsor.
Right.
Yeah.
For an LLC. The LLC, as I'm assuming, received grants.
Okay. So usually, so there's different kind of levels of fiscal sponsorship, but usually if you're a fiscal sponsor, either you've kind of taken on the project as a project that also matches your vision or your goals or your mission. And so you are taking the money in and you're providing that money to another set of people who are kind of implementing the project, but it's really your organization's money. So if you mean, is that part of our overall budget? Yes, it is, because you as the fiscal agent, as not agent, as the fiscal sponsor, are still the ones financially responsible. I mean, it's your program. So it is part of what of your organization. It's not separate.
Perfect.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does. It does.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes a lot of sense. Kimberly has a question or a comment, actually comment question. That's probably true for many people. They haven't been able to get the large grants yet because they're new. Is there a good place to look for information to get started? Maybe micro grants or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Any
I
tips
would
for what to do if you're new, basically?
yeah, I would, and I always told new clients this, like let's work local first. So let's build getting the, again, local your community foundations are usually very they have people who kind of understand, nonprofits and especially small nonprofits, and they usually have staff that will work with you and kind of teach you and guide you as well. So like community foundations are a great starting point. Then you can look at local community, like just local foundations, local family foundations, your United Ways. And so you usually kind of want to start local before you start kind of going to a statewide funder or a federal funder, start building that local support first, build that up, then go to your more national funders or your government funders. So start at your community and your local family foundations, again, all of which you can find in your GrantStation membership.
Mason asked a question, which I think is right up your alley. Are you able to share some insider resources that can support the development of a formal evaluation process? That reminds me of something. What could that be? A formal evaluation process.
Yes. So we also have webinars on like developing logic models, which is a piece of your formal evaluation. So I know we have one. I don't have the date off the top of my head, but I'm doing one this spring through GrantStation. So you could join our logic model webinar, and it will show you the steps that you need to take to develop that initial evaluation plan, and tips and resources and all that sort of thing.
And they're not as scary as you think they might be. In
That's
case
right.
you look it up and you're not sure, it's like, this looks too much for me. It's not. Even I get it.
Right.
So anyone can do it. There's no problem with that. Cheryl has a common question that comes in often. How does a nonprofit get operational funding with no money?
Yeah. So, again, Cheryl, I think that I would encourage you to think, broadly about other ways to get monies as well. So like I understand that like I want to go out there for grants, but think about what that in-kind support that your organization may have already going on. If you're operating with no money, you obviously have a lot of in-kind support, right? Because people are working for free for you. So again, using that, tracking that, I mean, it's a trackable thing. You can't just make up numbers, but using that as a real dollar amount to show the funder that you have all this other support through in-kind will just help them see that, again, you maybe need 10,000 real dollars, but you have $40,000 in-kind support through your volunteers who are running the programs. And so then they're only providing 10,000 of a $50,000 project. So it just shows that you kind of have support from other places, and it's just they're more inclined to support you than if you just go to them, I've got nothing, can I have it all from you?
In your experience, this is from Maria, how long does a nonprofit have to be operational and delivering services before funders are really receptive to provide funding to them?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I don't know that I have an exact answer, unfortunately, Maria, because I've worked with organizations, that started out providing all their work, um, as volunteers, and then they, started to add, like the last question, started adding layers of grant funding and donations onto that. And then there's other places that I think, if you're matched up with the funder right away, like you really both have this really great collective vision and you're working with them and you have, these other things that I've been talking about, the program, the policies and procedures, the, your board of directors is operating, like all those kinds of things, that as long as they see that your project is really viable, then they're not going to, that they'll be fine to support that startup because they see the strength of it. So it's kind of, understanding a little bit. That's where sometimes some of the networks that you'll build up are important, because it could be like some funders like to be the first dollar in, or they like to be the last dollars in, and kind of understanding, which ones want to be the first dollars in and which ones want to be the last dollars in, and then developing your strategy from there. So that's kind of a little bit of learning on the ground, what's going on with the different funders and where, the sweet spot's going to be for you.
I think we've got one final question we can fit in.
Okay.
And again, thank you everyone for joining us. Quick reminder, you'll get a full copy of the recording as well as all the presenter notes. They'll arrive by Wednesday of next week. So Mason asks, when you're writing about this population that you're serving, what's more important during the screening process, the data or the story?
Oh, Mason, what a great question. So it's both. I mean, you're going to have to put information and data that the funder has asked you for, right? You're going to have to answer their questions, and there's going to be data and information that you put in there. But I like to come at it from both angles of weaving in the stories that help the funder really see your program in action. So I'm always kind of writing from both angles, right? Of providing the data that they need to make the decisions, but weaving in the storytelling and tugging on the heartstrings at the same time, so that you can, really engage them for the full impact of what you're doing. Now, that being said, if there is like no space, right? If it's like they want something in 500 characters or less, then I'm probably going to default more to the data. But anytime I can make that in an engaging story, and usually you can by tweaking things a little bit, I'm going to come from both angles.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com, your fast track to funding and online education.